All right, good morning, everybody. We're the early bird today. and, sometimes you wake up and you have fresh ideas in your head, and you say to yourself, let me get these ideas out first thing in the morning before I start my day and I start to get involved in other things. And then maybe I won't be as focused. These ideas won't be as fresh in my mind. These viewpoints won't be as fresh in my mind. A lot of traction is being put upon and behind these comments from Terence Crawford. They're attracting a lot of headlines, and these comments are very, very interesting. And a lot of times when people make blanket statements, they are just that. They're blanket statements made, and I don't think, and really the evidence suggests and the information suggests that more often than not, when these people do make these comments, that they're really not looking at the context of their comments. They're not looking at the situation. They're not looking at a lot of the other factors that bring us to the conclusion of a specific situation. So you just can't make a statement without really explaining why a situation is the way it is. It's very easy to just make a comment and not really go into depth on why a specific situation is the way it is, because there's a lot of contributive factors that are involved in why things are the way they are. So, in other words, people make comments and they try to oversimplify the comments. And a lot of times it's a lot more complicated than the way they're presenting their comments or their arguments. So let's really look at these comments from Terence Crawford. And I did talk about this a little bit in my previous video, and I showed examples of how the comments are somewhat hypocritical. They're somewhat hypocritical. And I don't even think somewhat hypocritical. They're hypocritical because Terence Crawford himself has not fought a lot of the African American fighters or a lot of black fighters in his most recent fights himself. And two fighters that allegedly, according to Terence Crawford, that are that Canelo is avoiding, Demetrius Andrade and Jamal Charlo, those two fighters themselves have not fought a lot of black fighters, a lot of African American fighters in their most recent fights. And not to beat a dead horse, but let's just pull it up, because I mentioned that in his last 6 fights, Demetrius Andrade only fought 2 black fighters. Okay, and I don't even believe any one of them were African American. Jamal Charlo fought 1 black fighter in his last 6 fights, and Demetrius Andrade is fighting Liam Williams in his next fight. He's not a black fighter. So I'm going to explain why you're seeing fighters fight a lot of other fighters with different ethnic backgrounds that are, you're seeing fighters in general fighting less African American fighters, fighting less black fighters. And there's a reason behind that. And no one's really bringing it up, and it's really not being explained when people make videos about this topic. There's one thing that people are overlooking, and they're not looking at the landscape and how it's changed in 2021 compared to back in the day in the 90s, where it was much different. When you look at the 90s, there's been a change in boxing overall, starting from the 2000s, where we've seen an influx of a lot of top level fighters coming from outside of the US, a lot of Eastern Europeans, a lot of Asian fighters, and even the Latino fighters are starting to become more prominent in the heavier divisions. We've even had a Latino or a Mexican heavyweight champion in recent years, which is something that was unheard of. This is the first time we've ever had a champion of Mexican descent become the heavyweight champion. So, in general, all fighters are fighting less black fighters because, again, boxing has become more global, and there's a lot of reasons behind that. And a lot of people say, well, Americans or African Americans are participating more in other sports. You're seeing less and less African American fighters because they're playing other sports. And there's also a reason behind that. It's not necessarily just because the popularity of boxing has diminished, according to a lot of people's opinions, but also when you look at these other sports, the leagues have expanded. There's more teams now. The playoffs have been restructured. There's more games. So there's more opportunities for people to become professional athletes in other sports because of the expansion of baseball, the expansion of basketball. We're seeing just the overall market of these other sports has grown immensely, and these sports themselves have become more global. You're seeing the NBA and the NFL being shown more so on a global platform than ever before. But getting back to Terence Crawford's comments, are they right? Yeah, but they're not just right in regards to Canelo. They're right across the board. So let's take a look at the ratings back in 1990. Pound for pound ratings back in 1990. Okay, let's just take a look at them. So pound for pound back in 1990, you had, and this is the rings ratings, and we'll take a look at the ESPN ratings as well. I know a lot of people are going to say, "Beep, who cares about the ring ratings? The ring ratings are trash." But let's just use these, in terms of let's just for the sake of argument. So back in 1990, this is April of 1991, pound for pound, Julio Cesar Chavez was number one. Pernell Whitaker was number two. Michael Nunn was number three. Antonio Esparza was number four. Meldrick Taylor was number five. Evander Holyfield was number six. Mike Tyson was number seven. Raul Perez was number eight. Meng Woo Yu was number nine. And Koaskar Galaxy was number 10. So if you look at that list back in 1991, you have Pernell Whitaker, Michael Nunn, Meldrick Taylor, Evander Holyfield, and Mike Tyson. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. You have five African Americans on the pound for pound list. So half of the pound for pound list back in 1991 was African American. And here's another startling statistic: is if you look at the heavyweights back in 1991, you had Evander Holyfield number one, Mike Tyson number two, Razor Ruddock number three, James Buster Douglas number four, Tim Witherspoon number five, Carl Williams number six, okay, Francisco Damiani number seven, Riddick Bowe number eight, Ray Mercer number nine, and George Foreman number 10. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 of the top 10 heavyweights back in 1991 were black, and 8 of them were African American. So now let's look at the landscape in 2021, which is totally, totally different. Totally, totally different. Let's take a look at these ratings here. So in 2021, pound for pound, okay, Canelo Alvarez is number one. Naoya Inoue is number two, which is debatable. I mean, that's kind of a little bit odd, but it's opinion based. Terence Crawford's number three. Alexander Usyk is number four. Errol Spence is number five. Teofimo Lopez is number six. Juan Francisco Estrada is number seven. Vasily Lomachenko is number eight. Josh Taylor is number nine. And Kazuto Aoki is number 10. So look at the difference here from 1990 to 2021. There are only 2 African Americans on this list. Okay. And if you look, at at the diversity of this list, you have one, two, three. You have three Hispanic fighters, okay, on this list. Okay. You have two Asian fighters on this list. And you have two Eastern European fighters on this list, and you have one European fighter on this list. So again, the landscape of boxing overall has changed. So not just Canelo Alvarez is going to be fighting less African American fighters. Boxing on a whole, because it's become much more diverse at the top level, because it's been much more diverse at the top level, and we're starting to see a lot of these networks cover, we're seeing a lot of these Asian fighters who are on American platforms now. You're seeing people on ESPN Plus. We're seeing the Zone cover a lot of these fights. So back in the 90s, we never saw a lot of these Asian fighters. Now, because these guys are being broadcast more, now they're getting put on, the people are starting to appreciate them more, and they're being put on lists, a lot of these Asian fighters, because you see two Asian fighters on this list, which is great. Okay. So it's a very diverse list because the landscape has changed. So that's why Terence Crawford's statements, they're not wrong, but they're applied incorrectly because he's not taking into consideration how boxing has changed on a whole. You know, you look at Terence Crawford himself, and if you apply his comments to himself, then he could apply these comments to his record as well. When you look, let's take a look at his last six opponents. Now, Cal Brook, he's black, but he's not African American. Kavaluskas is not black. Amir Khan is not black. Jose Benavidez Jr. is not black. Jeff Horn is not black. Julius Ndongo is black, but he's not African American. So if you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, if you look at Terence Crawford's last six opponents, he hasn't fought any African Americans. He has fought one European black fighter and one African black fighter. So the majority of his opponents have been non-black himself. So the same comments that could be, I'm not going to say that Crawford's avoiding black fighters. I'm not even going to say Canelo's avoiding black fighters, but there's not even less black fighters at the top level. There's just more of the other ethnic groups in these top level spots. So you're going to be fighting less black fighters across the board. And then you can even look even further than that. Let's look back. So let's look at his last 10 fights. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So out of Crawford's last 10 fights, he got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you got Hank Lundy, who is African American. Victor Postol is European. John Molina is Hispanic. Felix Diaz is Hispanic. Julius Ndongo is black. Jeff Horn is Australian, not black. Benavidez Jr. is not black. Amir Khan's not black. Kavaluskas is not black. Kell Brook is black. So in his last 10 fights, he has fought 1, 2, 3. So he's only fought 3 black fighters in his last 10 fights, and only one of those has been African American. So again, this is facts versus feelings. This isn't about, if you're speaking objectively, then he hasn't fought a lot of black fighters, and he hasn't fought a lot of African American. He's fought one African American fighter in his last 10 fights. So this is the teapot calling the kettle black. These statements are the epitome of hypocrisy. And let's look at Jamal Charlo. I know we spoke about this in another video, but let's speak about this again. Let's look at his last 6 fights and let's look at his last 10 fights. Okay. Okay. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So he fought Jorge Sebastian Holland. He's not a black fighter. Hugo Centennial is not black. Matt Korobov is not black. Brandon Adams is black. Dennis Hogan is not black. Sergey Derevyanchenko is not black. So in his last 6 fights, he has only fought one African-American fighter. So why doesn't Crawford say the same thing about Charlo? He's not fighting black fighters either. He's not fighting black fighters either. So let's look at Andre. So there's a reason why fighters are fighting less black fighters and they're fighting other fighters. It's not because they're avoiding black fighters. It's just because there's more top-level fighters in the other ethnic backgrounds, more so today than there was before, because back in the day, a lot of Eastern Europeans were not turning pro. They were staying amateur longer, and they're still doing that today. But what's happening is these Eastern European fighters have a platform. HBO showcased Golovkin. They showcased Lomachenko. They showcased Kovalev. Okay? So times have changed. The landscape has changed. So that's the reason why you have the situation the way it is. It's not because they're avoiding black fighters. So there's a lot of contributing factors to determine why things are the way they are. Okay, it's out of the control of these fighters because of the landscape. So even Andre himself, okay, Luke Keeler is not black. Suleski is not black. Atur Akabov is not black. Walter Katanda is African, and Alante Fox is African American. Jack Culkay is not African American. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this guy's fought two black fighters and one African American fighter in his last 6 fights. So these comments that Crawford made about Canelo Alvarez, he can apply them to himself. He can apply them to Demetrius Andre. He can apply them to Jamal Charlo. Okay? So if he wants to be accurate in his statements, he could say, well, you know what? Everybody is fighting less black fighters now because you're seeing more Eastern Europeans at the top level. You're seeing more Asian fighters at the top level. You're seeing more Hispanic fighters at the top level at the heavier weight classes, more so today than you did back in the 90s. We even saw in the 2000s, we had the emergence of the Klitschko brothers. Okay? For up until the 90s, the heavyweight division was always ruled by African American fighters. And then there was a change back in the 2000s when you had the Klitschko brothers. Okay? So times have changed. Times have changed. And not by choice, but this is just happened. This has just happened. So that's the thing. That's the thing. We can't just make blanket statements and not explain the statements. We have to look behind the statements that are being made here. Okay? So this isn't by design. This is just the way things have happened over time. The landscape has changed. It's no fault of anyone. It's not all about decision making. Even Devin Haney. Let's look at Devin Haney, who's another African American fighter. Let's look at his resume. Let's look at Devin Haney's resume. Take a look at his resume. So he fought Gamboa, fought Santiago. He fought Abdualov, Antonio Moran, Ulaski, Nabdugani, Juan Carlos Burlos, Mason Menard. So there's no, let's just take a look here. Let's take a look here. So this is one black gentleman who's from South Africa. Okay. Antonio Moran is Hispanic. Okay. Zaur Abdulov is Eastern European. Okay. Alfredo Santiago is Hispanic. Euricus Gamboa, he could be considered Cuban Afro. Okay. So Mason Menard, okay, is white. So Devin Haney, there's no African American fighters on his resume. Okay? There's no African American fighters on his resume. None in the last 6 fights. Okay? This guy's mostly fighting Hispanic fighters. So once again, you know, it's because of the landscape. There's just not a lot there's not as much top level African American fighters in 2021 as there was back in the 90s. So the landscape has changed, and that's why we have what we have. So we can go down, we can open up any fighter's resume right now, and this is going to be the case. This is going to be the case. Let's even pop open Anthony Joshua's resume. And we'll have to and let's look at his last 6 fights. See, guys, we could do this to anybody, not just Canelo. This can be done to everybody. This can be done to everybody. Let's look at Anthony Joshua. Let's take a look at his last 6 fights. Pulev is not African American. Andrew Ruiz is not African American. He fought him twice. So Andrew Ruiz is the 2 fights with Andrew Ruiz, Mexican. Alexander Povetkin, European. Joseph Parker, not black. So Carlos Takam, excuse me. He's African, right? Well, actually, he's from France, but he's black, obviously. So he's African. He's got African descent. Vladimir Klitschko, Eastern European. Eric Molina, Hispanic. Okay, Dominic Brazil. That's an African American fighter. So in the last 5 years, Anthony Joshua himself has only fought 1 African American fighter. And he's only fought 2 black fighters, okay, in his last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fights. Okay? So once again, I can pull up anybody's resume right now and do this to anybody, just about. Because, once again, not to sound redundant and beat a dead horse, but this has been said before, and it's just common knowledge. This is facts over feelings. It's facts over feelings. This isn't about talking about your favorite fighter. This is about this. This isn't about, we can criticize all day the level of opposition. I mean, I'm not gonna get in these debates, because if you really wanted to, you could rip apart anyone's resume. You could diminish anybody's resume. You could handpick certain opponents, and you could say, well, what about this guy? What about that guy? It's fine. That's great. This isn't about that. This is about Terence Crawford's comments and how they can be applied to just about any top level boxer today, because of the landscape and how the landscape has changed. And this is what people need to bring up. And this is what Terence Crawford himself needs to look at. Okay? This is what Terence Crawford himself needs to look at. You know, the fact of the matter is Crawford does not have a great resume, in my opinion, at welterweight. I'm not here to defend Crawford's resume. I think Canelo Alvarez, in my own honest, humble opinion, has the best resume in boxing right now. By far. By far. This is a guy who's going to be fighting 4 times this year during a pandemic. So I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to be totally honest with you. I think Canelo Alvarez is a guy who's doing things his own way right now. Got rid of De La Hoya. Basically, is a free agent. He's the top drawer in the sport, in my opinion. I know some people can say Anthony Joshua. You could go between the two of them. But there's no way Anthony Joshua is going to make more money in 2021 than Canelo Alvarez, because he's not going to be fighting 4 times. So Canelo Alvarez will be the top earner. He will be the top boxer on most people's pound-for-pound lists. And let's be honest, there's a lot of jealousy out there. There's a lot of hate out there from fans, fighters, rival networks alike. So, of course, when you're on the top, people are going to try to knock you off that perch, right? The old saying is, heavy lays the crown, right? They did it to Floyd. They're doing it to Canelo. And the guy after Canelo, it's going to be done to him as well. So there's going to be haters out there, okay? There's going to be haters out there. In my opinion, the toughest fight out there for Canelo Alvarez, in my own opinion, is David Benavidez. I think Jamal Charlo will provide a test, but I don't think he'll beat Canelo Alvarez. I think that the guy who has the greatest chance at beating Canelo Alvarez, and I would probably pick him to beat Canelo Alvarez, is David Benavidez. I think he's the most dangerous fighter from 160 to 175. That's just my opinion. Whether or not they're going to jump all over that fight, that remains to be seen. They're already talking about fighting Arthur Beterbiev, in September if that Caleb Plant fight doesn't get made. You know, and we could sit there and say so-and-so's not fighting that guy, so-and-so's avoiding this guy. But again, guys, everyone's doing it. And in Crawford's defense, he did come out and make a statement that he'll never fight Errol Spence. But I think that's based more on frustration of trying to fight Errol Spence over the years. These last 3 years, he's been trying to get a fight with Errol Spence. He's been trying to get a fight with those PBC guys, and to no avail. I don't think that those guys really want to fight Crawford, in my opinion. So he made that statement, and again, this is my opinion, based off of frustration of trying to negotiate and get fights with these guys, only to come up short. I think he's getting sick and tired of it. I think he's getting tired of dealing with it. So we have to, you know, look at this whole thing in context. All right. So people who have come on late, I made a lot of good points earlier in this video, and I just hope that you guys watch this video from start to finish if you can, and really analyze the points that I made and tell me if I'm wrong. All right. So I got to get this day started. I just wanted to bang this video out before I headed off to work, because a lot of these ideas are fresh in my mind. A lot of these points that I had were fresh in my mind, and I just wanted to get them. Off my chest. Okay. So thank you so much for joining me this morning, bright and early. Make sure you check me out tonight on D-Style Boxing's channel. I'll be on the round table, 8 p.m. Eastern time. And as always, make sure you check me out every Sunday night, 7 p.m. Eastern time, Ringside Reporter podcast, along with my co-host, Eric Lorda. Beeb is out. Talk to y'all soon. Stay safe. And guys, facts over feelings. I know that's a Ben Shapiro line, but I'm going to steal it from him. I think it's applicable in a lot of situations in regards to the sport of boxing and people's opinions. So facts over feelings. um, logic over emotion, objectivity over subjectivity. Okay, it's okay to be biased, but let's be able to self-reflect, and just admit that we're biased, and also give an objective viewpoint. All right, till next time, Beeb is out. Talk to y'all soon. Have a great day, everybody.